Yeah! What the heck just happened? Oh my gosh, so many trades in just the last 10 minutes. Like, Brian and I have been switching up this whole show. Sorry. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Keep Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the best fantasy hockey podcast in the world. Those are two guys who at one point owned Eric Karlsson in their keeper pools. Everyone's Dylan Dubrowski. Lots to talk about. With me to go through it all is Brian Calm.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Elon. You know, we had the whole show ready to go. We had all our ducks in a row. Everything was prepped. And then, well, you said 10 minutes. That's how it's felt. We've had like 45 minutes to prepare and scramble and get ready. Here we are with mostly formed thoughts on everything that's happened this week and today in the last hour.
Yeah, we've got two big trades to discuss. One where they might still be on the phone, so we'll get to that in a second. But we're definitely going to cover this Bishop to LA trade, which everyone is just scratching their heads right now going, why? What? Just why? Why did this trade happen? But okay, before we get into that, let's take a second to mention that we are presented by the best fantasy hockey website out there, dobberhockey.com. You know that if it's not there already, it's going to be there really soon. Full trade analyses, impacts, fantasy impacts, who gets hurt, who gets helped. Everything you need to know about a trade that happens. And, you know, the trade deadline, Brian, the actual deadline is, I think, Wednesday. So there's going to be a lot going down, and you're going to want to keep appraised of it all and all the impacts at dobberhockey.com.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, I already consulted them for a trade that we're going to talk about that did not happen just moments before we started recording tonight's episode. And they have it, like you said, Elon, ranked very well. They tell you who a trade helps in order and who a trade hurts in order from each team. They consider all the angles, just like we're going to try to do, but definitely round out your full trade impact knowledge with the articles over at dobberhockey.com.
Yeah, and plus, obviously, you've still got your starting goalies, your line combinations, all the regular tools, plus definitely around trade deadline time, all the content. So check it out. Brian, let's get going. And I'm seeing here in the chat room, Dobber Hockey might be down. Okay, no, let's get go. Oh, you wrote that.
That's
okay,
let's me. I can't load it.
Maybe there's too much traffic.
Wow.
That's all right. Let's get going. It just got announced. Literally an hour ago. We recorded 8 p.m. EST on Sunday, and we heard that Ben Bishop has been traded to the LA Kings for Peter Budaj and Eric Cernak. So forget about Cernak. Forget about picks. I think there's apparently a pick upgrade and a 20% salary retention, blah, blah, blah. Basically, for fantasy purposes, we've got Bishop for Budaj. So many questions. First of all, this is like one trade, but we've got 4 goalies affected here in terms of fantasy value. We're going to have to talk about quick Bishop, Budaj, and Vasilevsky. Who benefits? Who gets hurt? We already had a discussion prepped, right, to talk about Quick's injury, because Quick just came back from his groin injury that kept him out for most of the season. Now, obviously, the whole context has changed, and we've tried, like you said, to scramble and change what we were going to say about the whole thing. But first, maybe before we get into all these players, can we just have a quick discussion, Brian, of, like, what's the motivation here? Why would the Kings do this? Why would Tampa Bay do this? Like, from Tampa Bay's perspective, I guess it makes sense to me just in that, you know, they have these 2 goalies. They were probably going to lose Bishop to expansion, or he was going to become a free agent. Though I'd imagine they would have wanted more like picks from him or something. Anyway, and then from the Kings' perspective, it even puzzles me more because they already have Jonathan Quick as their starting goalie, and they had Peter Budaj, who did a great job while Quick was injured. I assume Quick and Budaj would be a great tandem to go with into the playoffs. Now they trade Budaj for Ben Bishop, who's been up and down all year. I just don't see why they would do it. Like, maybe is Quick still hurt? Here's some conspiracy theories for you. Like, maybe Quick tweaked something in that last game or in a practice, or maybe sorry guys, maybe, you know what, I don't even know. Brian, like, illuminate me a little bit here, because I'm struggling to understand why this trade happened.
Yeah, a lot of us don't know unless LA has a plan to collect all of last year's Vezina finalists, in which case they're 2/3 of the way through, or they're on another plan to collect all of the USA goalies from the World Cup, in which case they're also 2/3 of the way through towards that goal. So you wonder if Holtby or Schneider are the next goalie that might be the next goalie they acquire. But I guess that's a pretty far-fetched scenario. Seriously, though, that's like as good as it gets for theories of why each team did this. Let's start with LA, who acquires Bishop and makes you wonder if they know something about Jonathan Quick's health that we don't. I was actually looking for a picture of Quick the other day to post in our Facebook group for the game night thread. And every image had him like doing the splits. And that, made me remember that Jonathan Quick likes to do these sort of acrobatic big things with his body. And so maybe they want some better insurance with Ben Bishop. I've also seen theories thrown around that maybe they're preventing another Western team from grabbing Bishop, which seems to make about as much sense. If Quick is healthy and they have no concerns about his health, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It's a very expensive tandem now. It's a very average tandem. Yes, Ben Bishop isn't going to get paid by the Kings past this year, so the cost doesn't matter so much. It's just a weird tandem because you don't see one better than the other or one who's had a great season to stand on. You have Bishop who just started getting good, Quick who just returned. And of course, let's not forget, LA just sent the guy packing who saved their entire season in Peter Budaj. Now, Budaj, 917 on the year, but that's friendly to what his numbers have been like over the last little while. 2-6-0 with an 884 save percentage over his last 8 games, just a 913 since December 31st. So this isn't a new thing. His best games of the season definitely came at the front end of it. And he's been struggling lately. And then you look at Bishop, who's actually worse. He's 6 points worse on the year, 911, 4-0 lately though, in his last 4 starts with a 964 save percentage. And over his last 16, he's actually picked up his game quite well, 9-3-3 with a 923 save percentage. So the Kings definitely improved their goaltending tandem, but the question is why? Tampa also gave them a better pick. They got a draft pick upgrade in the deal, LA did, and Tampa's also retaining salary. So Tampa did a lot to get Ben Bishop off their hands. My immediate thought was one of these teams has something else cooking. There's some ulterior motive to this trade, and we'll see if another domino falls in the meantime. But for now, for LA, I just don't get it unless they want a little better insurance going into the playoffs. They want to prevent an opponent from getting there, or they want to prevent an opponent from beefing up their own goaltending, or that they're concerned about Jonathan Quick's health. Those are my 3 theories that are ongoing.
Okay, so that's enough of us sort of doing general NHL talk. Let's get into the fantasy impacts now. Let's start with Ben Bishop. Okay, so like you said, he's finally started to be doing well. Actually, I also had prepped already yesterday for our show to talk about how Ben Bishop has finally picked up his game, and it looks like maybe he's taking the job back from Vasilevsky. All that goes out the window now. But yeah, he's had 4 straight really great games. He hasn't let in more than 2 goals in all of February, though that's only 5 games played, but a 938 save percentage over the month. Looks like Tampa Bay was transitioning back to Bishop playing 2 games out of every 3, which is what they were doing for much of the start of the year. So then I'd imagine this is not good news for Bishop owners, right? Because they go from a goalie who was looking like he was going to play around 66% of the games to a guy who maybe will play 50% or less. I can't imagine Jonathan Quick becomes a straight up backup. So maybe if it's a 50-50 thing, Bishop loses a lot of games. Of course, on the other side, maybe Bishop's now playing for a better defensive team, and it might help his rate stats. But overall, I'd say this is bad news for Ben Bishop, unless really you only care about goals against average.
Yeah, I think it's bad news for Ben Bishop. I saw Dobber hockey writer Steve Laidlaw mention just moments after the trade went down. He thinks that Bishop starts half the games down the stretch. At least that was his knee-jerk reaction. I'm not sure I can get with that just yet, although it makes sense. If they're concerned about Quick getting re-injured, they rest him more down the stretch instead of him going from 0 to 100 and starting, 15 of the last 20 games. Maybe he starts 10 or 12 of the last 20 games to go. But yeah.
That's fine.
Well, I'll say, but it definitely does put a bit of a dent in Quick's value because now you have Bishop.
I haven't talked about Quick yet.
Oh, so
I'm about
Bishop?
to. I was just talking about Bishop.
Okay. So yeah, probably does dent Bishop's value some because he seemed to be emerging as the 2 out of every 3 games starter in Tampa. And now he's in a place where I doubt he gets an opportunity to see more than half, if that.
Right. Okay. And then Jonathan Quick. So he's finally back from his groin injury. Like I said, he had a great return, a 4-1 win versus Anaheim, 32 saves for 970 save percentage for what it's worth. I saw a recent note on Roto World, before this trade, Daryl Sutter said the veteran goaltender's workload will be managed, according to LA Kings Insider. So clearly, I was just thinking, oh, good news for Budaj owners. He doesn't totally lose all of his value, even though Quick is back. Maybe he'll be able to play 30, 40% of the games. But maybe that helps explain what's going on. They don't want to work Quick too hard, though I thought Budaj, would be fine. But whatever. The deal is done. Keep in mind, Quick has only been a 918 save percentage goalie over the past 2 seasons, which is fine. Like, that's league average, but it's not like he's been completely sensational. So I was going to suggest before the trade that now might be a good time to sell high. Might be a good time to sell high on Jonathan Quick because, he was coming back. He was a starter. Obviously, lots of hype for him. He had this good game. Now I don't know if you can sell high anymore because he's part of this tandem now. I think that his value also gets hurt. Like, I would have assumed at worst he would play like 60-70% of the games with Budaj as his backup. Now also, like, they have to play Bishop. They didn't get him just to sit there. So I feel like they're going to be close to 50-50. So also not great news for Jonathan Quick, unless maybe the rest that he'll get from having fewer games will help his rate stats. But I don't know. Overall, I think it's kind of like bad news for both of the new LA goalies in terms of their fantasy value, just because they're both going to get fewer games than we would have expected before this trade.
Yeah, totally agree with you there. Your usual reminder is here that Jonathan Quick is not a great goaltender. He is average, maybe marginal. He is average, maybe marginally better than average, but I would not go any further than that. So I guess if he falters, like, I'm curious to see how short a leash he's on now. If he is healthy and everything's okay, and he turns in a couple poor starts, like, LA isn't a playoff race right now. Do they have the patience to let him sort it out, or do they really trust Ben Bishop to just step in that net and take over?
By the way, we should mention, Jade is asking in the chat room here, aren't they still pushing for a playoff spot, or are they out? Obviously talking about the Kings. Currently, the Kings are 3 points back in the West from the wild card. So it's not like they're in the playoffs for sure. They're pushing. So I guess right now is their playoffs. So just assume that they made this trade to help them in the playoffs. But in the playoffs, I mean basically right now, because they need to win games moving forward as if they were in the playoffs. Okay, so then we have the 2 Tampa Bay goalies. We have Vasilevskiy and Budaj, 2 guys who were looking like backups yesterday, now are going to, I guess, be battling for who's going to be the starter. Maybe they'll also be a 50-50 tandem. We've got a rookie, we've got a veteran. Vasilevskiy has a 909 save percentage on the season, not very good, and he's been even worse lately, like only a 900 goalie, I think, in February. He showed he clearly can't yet handle the starter's job. When Bishop was injured, Vasilevskiy was just terrible. He only did better, I guess, once Bishop was coming back. Budaj, on the other hand, 917 save percentage on the year, like you said, Brian. So he's been a lot better than Vasilevskiy, which makes me think that Budaj should be the starter. But at the same time, Tampa's pretty far out of the playoff race themselves. They're 7 points back of the wild card. So maybe they're deciding, all right, we're done. We're thinking about the future now, in which case might as well give Vasilevskiy the reins, see what he can do, and then they have a decent backup in Budaj if he falters so much that they need to play someone else. Either way, to me, it kind of looks like an improvement for both of them, right? Like for Bishop and Quick, I feel like both of their fantasy value goes down as they're going to play less games. But for Vasilevskiy and Budaj, I think both of their value goes up because Budaj, I think, has a much better chance of playing if he's backing up Vasilevskiy than he would if he was backing up Quick. And Vasilevskiy is now a starting goalie until he blows it, if and when.
Yeah, this is a real turn of event for Quick owners who were so pumped about him returning finally after waiting all season, and for Budaj owners who were probably really down in the dumps, feeling like they had a worthless asset that Quick was going to run the table the rest of the season. Budaj wouldn't see any time. Now he moves to Tampa, where he's playing. I imagine he's behind Vasilevskiy in the pecking order, and Vasilevskiy is going to get the opportunity to play maybe a lot, or maybe they won't have patience because they too are in a desperate playoff race right now. They're quite far out. They're as far out as Buffalo is. They have 62 points. They are 7 behind Toronto for the last wild card spot with only 1 game in hand. So again, another team you wonder, how long a leash are they going to give Vasilevskiy before they turn to Budaj? I think also what this does for Budaj is it gives him some value perhaps for next year. It sounds like he could get a look as their backup goalie, which makes sense, right? If you have Vasilevskiy, a young goalie, to have some veteran presence, a guy who can be like an average NHL backup goalie, that seems like a decent thing to do, especially with the experience Budaj has accrued over the year. But back to this year, it certainly helps Budaj's value and it helps Vasilevskiy's value. The question is, can Vasilevskiy run with what he's given now? And he hasn't been able to all season long, even when the opportunities came. You wonder now, with nobody breathing down his neck, he'll feel like he's able to. I can't wait to find out.
Yeah, it's usually been whenever Bishop gets injured, we say, rush, go grab Vasilevsky. And now when Bishop is traded, we're like, I don't know, maybe I'm not so sure he'll be able to do well. So, buy at your own risk at this point. It's funny because, Brian, you were just messaging me earlier today. We're in a pool together against each other, and my brother's also in this pool, and he is a Budai owner. And you messaged saying, ooh, should I send a trade offer to your brother to rip him off now that he has lost, a starting goalie? Now that Quick was back and you have Quick, so I assume you were going to try to trade him Quick and get a huge haul in return. Now my brother sort of gets a extra breath because Budai maybe will play more. It's very interesting to think of the implications and like what you were going to do. We were going to come on today and we were going to talk all about what to do if you're a Quick owner now that he's back, and what to do if you're a Budai owner, and it all goes out the window.
Yeah, just to be clear, Elon, you were the one who mentioned ripping off the Budai owner in the doc that we had prepped in our show notes, and then I asked, using your words, if I should rip off. That's generally how I don't go into trades, but I was definitely tantalized by the idea.
Yeah. Anyway, if ifs and buts, you know the saying. Let's move on. We'll obviously have to check back in on this trade in a week or two and see how everyone's doing, all those 4 goalies. Let's go to another trade, which is not like official yet. So maybe I should give myself an optional edit point here for if it turns out it doesn't go through by the time the show is out. So here, let's cut here. Now I'm going to say, actually, it turned out the trade didn't happen. So let's move on. Okay, now end that cut. Back to the talk of saying that Martin Hanzal has apparently been traded to Minnesota. They're apparently still on the phone. I don't know, Brian, it was just really funny when Brian was telling me actually the trade might not be official because they haven't ended the phone call yet. And I'm wondering, how do people know about this trade then? Is he texting while he's on the phone, telling his friends how he's about to make a trade? Because Arizona's made a really good trade here. I would be texting my friends. They just traded Martin Hanzal, who's going to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year, and Arizona's not in the playoffs. And it's looking like they're going to be getting a first-round pick, a second pick, and a conditional pick from the Minnesota Wild. So Minnesota's clearly all in, and Arizona is like looking good for the future if they could do something good with these picks. But anyways, the fantasy impact here, obviously we have to look at Martin Hanzal. It's so crazy with the Minnesota Wild right now because if you look at my Cupful division, the Ottawa second-tier division of the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantrax League, there was only one player in the Minnesota top line. There was only one player in the Minnesota top 9 that was not owned by a team, and that was Erik Haula. And I think now we can make that 0. We've got the Lions in their last game. They were Eric Stahl, Niederreiter, and Coyle, Koivu, Granlund, and Zucker, and then Parise, Haula, and Pominville. So I think swap out Haula, put in Hanzal. He fits right nicely there with Parise and Pominville for like the old-timers line. And there you go. All of a sudden, Martin Hanzal slots in really well. They have a top 9 of all fantasy relevant players and guys you want to have, especially for next week where Minnesota plays 4 games. I believe Minnesota plays 4 games every other week for the rest of the fantasy playoffs, at least in the couple, maybe not the final week of the season. So, okay. As far as if this is good or bad for Martin Hanzal, he has 26 points in 51 games overall on the year, which is a 42-point pace, which isn't very good, but he has 6 goals and 1 assist in his last 8 games. So I wonder which is the real Hanzal or which is the Hanzal that we'll be seeing over in Minnesota. Like at first I was thinking, oh, he loses his top line, top power play spot. But if he's swapping Verbata and Domi for Parise and Pominville as his line mates, and Pominville's like been red hot lately, seems like not too much of a downgrade. And also Minnesota scores more goals. I guess we'll have to see if Hanzal could get onto a power play unit. Like he'd have to bump someone. Haula isn't there as easy pickings. He's going to have to bump one of these other more strong forwards. Overall, Brian, what do you think? Is this good news or bad news for Hanzal owners? People who grabbed him at one point, should they now be thinking, whatever, time to drop him? Or do you get excited about him if he's in free agency because he's on the Minnesota Wild somewhere in their top 9?
Well, I think it was a popular first thought that the Wild already have Eric Stahl and Mikko Koivu down the middle, so maybe Martin Hanzal is in the bottom 6, except, like you're saying with the top 9, Elon, Minnesota doesn't have a bottom 6. They have that top 9. You name any guy in that top 9, and I'm going to name them all right now. You stop me when you hear the name of somebody who has been without a hot streak at some point this season, without favorable fantasy production, someone without fantasy relevance for the majority of the season. Niederreiter, Stahl, Coyle, Granlund, Koivu, Zucker, Parise, Pominville. Well, in the 9th piece, you can stop me here, is Erik Haula.
I know, I just said that. I just said all of that, Brian.
Well, no, but okay, so I guess I'm just trying to emphasize the point that now you slide Martin Hanzal in there, and I guess it's a good situation for him. Like, it's not top line, top power play like he was seeing in Arizona. He's not going to see top power play, but you wonder if like 13 or 14 minutes a night in Minnesota is better than 17 or 18 minutes a night in Arizona. I'm also excited for the prospects here of Zach Parise and Jason Pominville. I think Hansel is an upgrade on Eric Haula for them, so they're not sort of stuck on the bottom third of that top 9. Now it's more evenly rounded, and the Wild just have a really formidable depth chart, especially down the middle now with Stahl, Koivu, and Hansel. Like, don't get me wrong, Hansel, the price was steep. They traded what'll end up being, a late first round pick, like one of the last few of the round, and a second round pick, which has even less of a chance of panning out. But if that sets the price for future acquisitions, like any team that was hoping to land Matt Duchene is probably really angry about how much the Wild paid the Coyotes for Martin Hansel, who is a half-point per game player. He's never scored more than 16 goals in a year. Don't expect him to suddenly explode and blossom into anything more than a 50-point player, but at least he'll be surrounded with some more talent, less minutes, but maybe that'll help make up. But maybe that'll all even out to him being able to continue doing essentially what he's been doing during his time in Arizona.
One thing I've been enjoying about Hansel, and he's a guy I picked up for my cupful playoffs, is he's been getting a lot of blocks lately, which was something I wasn't expecting. So I have a feeling I'm going to be losing out on those. I don't think Minnesota is going to put their forwards in a position to have to block a bunch of shots like Arizona does.
Yeah, and speaking of Arizona, Elon, let's go back there for a minute. Well, first off, actually, I'll talk about Hansel blocking. I feel like there will be fewer opportunities for him to block shots in Minnesota. So if you're really counting on those blocks, perhaps he'll lose 1 or 2 over the course of a week. But if you look back to Arizona, now their top line is without a centerman. They have Vrbata and Domi floating around with, I guess, it could be good news for Christian Dvorak, who's been on a pretty good scoring pace recently. Not totally evenly scoring, but I think I was looking earlier today, something like 9 points in his last 12. We mentioned him on the show recently too. So he's someone to watch. He's someone to watch that could get more ice time and better deployment, but it is worse news for Vrbata and Domi and whoever else is playing around that top line, top power play in Arizona, because it just got a lot thinner.
Yeah, I mean, unless, of course, Vrbata, he could still get traded himself, and Arizona could just get a bunch more picks, so maybe it's not so bad for him yet. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, you'd assume it's worse. But at the same time, Hansel was injured for a while, though I believe that's around the time when Vrbata was slumping, so maybe there's something to it. Domi was also injured for a while. It's hard to say with these Arizona guys. I feel like for all of them, for Domi and for Vrbata, Domi's like a guy that could be really good, but also could definitely not have value this year, and you're looking to the future. And now with these picks they've gotten, hopefully Arizona will become a really strong team. And you mentioned Christian Dvorak, and also there's Dylan Strome, who's going to come up next year. So I think in a dynasty league, this is probably good news for Domi, maybe not for this year. And then Vrbata, you have him until he slows down, and then the plan is to drop him. That's what you should have been doing anyways. Okay, Brian, I feel like at this point we can now finally get to the content that we actually prepared for the show. I was going to start the show before an hour ago talking about how Patrick Eaves has been traded to the Anaheim Ducks for a pick. This feels like years ago that this has happened. Eaves has already actually played a game with Anaheim. But okay, let's look into this trade now. Eaves is having a career year, right? He has 37 points in 59 games. Or at least that's what he had before the trade. 21 of those 37 points have been goals, so a 21-goal year. He's destroyed his career high of 32 points, and there's still like 20 games left in the season for him. He also has 154 shots so far, which is a career high. So overall, just Patrick Eaves has been a completely different player this year. He had runs like this in previous seasons, and maybe if you would look at point paces, maybe he was similar last year, like he had a lot of injury trouble, but this year he hasn't gotten injured. He's had a good amount of time with Ben and Sagan, and he's been doing well, but obviously that now changes. He goes to the Anaheim Ducks, and the big question is he going to be able to keep this up as a member of the Anaheim Ducks? And my initial thought would be probably not, since he's losing his cushy top power play spot with Ben and Sagan and time with one of them or both of them at even strength. So probably, I'm thinking bad news for Patrick Eaves. Though, okay, let's look at what happened yesterday. He played his first game with the Ducks, no points, but he had 5 shots, which is really good in the 4-1 loss versus Jonathan Quick and the LA Kings. And the lines going into the game were Cogliano, Kessler, and Silfverberg. That never changes. Then Getzlaf, Ritchie, and Kasha. And then Eaves, Raquel, and Perry. So Patrick Eaves was playing with Rickard Raquel and Corey Perry. Not so bad, right? Decent line mates. But it looks like halfway through, things got switched up, I guess because they were losing. And Eaves ended up playing with Getzlaf and Nick Ritchie for a bit. And Eaves was also on power play too with Raquel and Silfverberg and Bieksa and Lindholm. So overall, he loses Ben or Sagan at even strength, but he gains a Getzlaf or a Perry, so not so bad. I'm curious to know, Brian, what do you expect from Eves moving forward? Is it a big difference that he's with Getzlaf or Perry as opposed to Ben or Sagan? He's currently on a 51-point pace. Do you think he can keep that up, or do you think he's going to go down to being more like a 40-point guy moving forward?
I don't think this helps him a whole lot, but we should give him credit, as you were at the outset of this little chat about the trade, for what he's done this year. He co-led the Stars in goals before being traded, tied with Tyler Seguin. If you think Tyler Seguin scored a lot of goals, Patrick Eves has scored just as many. The question is, why has this season been so remarkable for Patrick Eves? The first very obvious answer is that he's been healthy. He's played 60 games this year already, and that means he's already played more games this season than he had in any of the previous 5 years. He's missed 115 games just over the last 3 years, several more over the course of his career. I think he's only played more than 70 twice in his 12 years in the NHL. The other thing that's even more different this year than staying healthy is that he's also... let me change how I lead into that. But in addition to spending less time on the IR, he's also spending less time on the bench during the games that he is healthy enough to dress for. As a 32-year-old, that he's healthy enough to dress for. As a 32-year-old in his 12th year in the NHL, he's averaging 3 minutes more of ice time than he ever has before. This is a guy who spent his career playing between 11 and 13 minutes a night until this year, when now he's suddenly averaging over 16 and a half minutes. And this trend of increased ice time also carried through to the power play. He has 16 power play points this year, 11 power play goals on 39 shots, which is a near 30% shooting percentage. But that's a shooting percentage he's maintained as the net front guy in Dallas for the last 3 years. But he's getting more minutes with the man advantage, and he's taking more shots in those minutes, and it's all working out very well. So to circle back to what he is now that he's a Duck, so he's a 50-point pace forward, playing nearly 17 minutes a night and cashing in big time on the top power play unit. That was actually sustainable, I felt, as long as Ben and Sagan were buzzing around in the picture in various ways. I don't know that he can stay that relevant with the Ducks. There's definitely room for him alongside Perry and or Getzlaf, but that duo is not Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin, and that is who Eves has collected the majority of his points with this year. So I'd expect a downtick in points now that he's with the Ducks, even if he does stick on the top unit in Anaheim and play with one of their big names. I think 50 plus would be a really tall order. I'm expecting they'll still give him plenty of ice time. I don't see that going down much, but I think you should adjust your expectations to be closer to 45 than to 50.
Yeah, I agree. And okay, so here's a fun question for you, Brian. Like, which forward on the Ducks, not named, I guess, Kessler, Perry, Getzlaf, or Silverberg, would you want at this point if you could get any other one? Like, Raquel is someone who we basically called a snoozer last week, so of course he had a 2-goal game. But still, those are his only points in his last 7. He's still someone I'm not overly excited about at this point. Nick Ritchie, I feel like, could be a dark horse with 4 points in his last 4 games, and he's playing with Ryan Getzlaf, especially if your league counts hits. He hasn't getting so many hits, but still, he has the upside to give you that. So like Raquel, Ritchie, Eves, or someone else who you're gonna blow my mind with. Like, who would you want if you could have one other guy on Anaheim as a forward?
So Eves did have 5 shots. Did you say this too?
Yeah.
Okay.
You could say, so like you said.
So like you said, Eves did have 5 shots in his debut. He still played more than 16 minutes with a good chunk of power play time. I don't know if you're able to rely on guys like Raquel or Ritchie for a whole lot. So if Eves can keep putting up like near 3 shots a game as he was in Dallas, and if he keeps getting good looks on the power play, I may still prefer him of the bunch. Raquel definitely has the highest upside, and Ritchie is the dark horse, especially if you're in a hits league. But I think Ritchie may be susceptible to being bumped from his current duties with the acquisition of Eves. So who do I want? I'd probably roll the dice and go with Raquel, even though Eves, I was saying, offers more certain value. I feel like it still might not be enough for your fantasy team, so I would probably go big or go home with Raquel, which still wouldn't be that big.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. And okay, one more piece of Ducks news before we go look at the fantasy impact here in Dallas. So John Gibson is on the IR with a lower body injury, but it looks like he's eligible to play in the Ducks next game on Friday after their bye week, even though he's on IR. So I wouldn't be too worried. I think he was almost going to play in their last game and they didn't. So actually, this is kind of like a nice opportunity to stash him while the Ducks aren't playing. I'm really enjoying it. I have Gibson in the cupful. It sucked to lose him for a couple of games, but I'm very happy to know that at least during the Ducks bye week, they don't play again, like I said, till next Friday. I can just put him in my IR and have an extra skater or another goalie in his place, and hopefully he'll play and he'll be fine. Though maybe it's a nice opportunity for you to buy low from a concerned owner that doesn't really know that Gibson is going to be coming back soon, doesn't pay too much attention. I don't know if this is like mean to be giving advice of how to take advantage of weak owners, but he's on the IR, and I think overall he's having a really good season, right? And Jonathan Bernier, by the way, is pretty bad. He has done badly in the 2 games he's played in the 2 games he's played in Gibson's absence. And Gibson, so he has a .922 save percentage on the year now and a .940 save percentage over his last 2 months. That's 22 games. So he had that really weak start, and ever since then has been just a really tremendous, phenomenal goalie. Of course, still kind of a small sample size. But Brian, I remember you said early on in the season that you kind of see Gibson as just an average NHL goalie. I'm curious if you still feel that way at this point. Like, I think going into the season even, you said Gibson might not be as good as people think. So I guess I'm just curious for an update on how you feel about John Gibson now that he's been having these good games. I know you're really good at looking beyond just a couple of good months and looking at the big picture. So where do you see Gibson right now? Like, there's a bunch of these young goalies that people think as like really valuable in keeper leagues. The Matt Murrays and the Vasilevsky, Hellebuck. You see Saros is in the conversation. Where does John Gibson fit with those guys now at this point?
Yeah, so he's now above .920 over his last 88 games played, and I know I've said he's an average.
Sorry, because I was. But I was muted. Oh, I'm so dumb. Okay, sorry. Start again, please.
Man.
I thought I'd interrupted you, and then I realized that Okay,
that's okay. Okay. So Gibson is now above. Excuse me. I'll try that one more time. So Gibson is now above .920 over his last 88 games played through this season and the last one. So yeah, I can upgrade him to possibly a little above average. I just think people were really overrating him, like as he started his career and was battling it out with Anderson. People had him as this blue chip goaltending prospect who was going to be like in the mid, maybe even high 920s. He's still not going to get there, but it would be nice if he is a touch above average, as he has shown himself to be so far. So good for him. As for all the guys you mentioned, I think I'd prefer them all to Gibson. Murray, I just need to find the list. The doc is all out of whack. Who was it? Murray, Gibson, Hellebuck. Was that it?
I said Murray, Vasilevsky, Hellebuck, and Saros.
Yeah. Murray, Vasilevsky, and Saros are all on better teams. Murray's already the #1 goalie. Vasilevsky, especially after today, seems like he's pretty darn close to it, if not already. Saros could be there in about a year, so I guess it depends if you have patience for that to happen. But once Saros is starting for the Predators, I'd prefer him over Gibson. Hellebuck is the one who's not on a better team, but I still think he's the better goaltending prospect above John Gibson. So for that reason, I think I'm going to put Gibson at the bottom of that list. In the short term, he's probably better than Saros and Hellebuck, but if I'm looking like 3 or 4 years out, I think I would prefer both Hellebuck and Saros to him.
Man, what does Gibson have to do? I guess we'll check back in another month or two and see if he can change your mind, if he keeps this pace up.
Well, that's a great group of goalies, though. Like, if anything, it's reason to be really excited about having some stable goaltending around the league at a time. Fewer number ones than ever. It'd be nice for these guys.
It just froze for me. Can you go? It just goes to show that it's a great time to something like goalies around the league.
Okay.
Sorry, it froze.
Okay. Well, this just goes to show how exciting. Well, this just goes to show how we have such an exciting new crop of goalies to look forward to, where John Gibson isn't first, may not be second, may not be third, but it's great to have this whole new stable of goalies to look forward to and track through their careers and get excited that there might be some really high quality #1s coming, because it feels like there's been a dearth of them through this crazy goaltending year.
I mean, maybe my question should have been, what does Vasilevsky have to do, and what does Gibson have to do for you to put Gibson ahead of Vasilevsky? Because Vasilevsky's been having a horrible season, and Gibson has been really good. But okay, we'll check in on both of them in a little bit. I want to get to the fantasy impact of this Eves trade on the Dallas side, and I guess you guys can tell probably that this was expected to be how we were going to open the show, because we have so much to talk about this Patrick Eves trade, which now seems like just a throwaway trade compared to what else has gone on. But yeah, we have Eves moving away from the Stars, and that really affects their lines because he was a guy on a good line and on the top power play. So if we look at the lines they've been rolling for the last two games, their first two Evesless games on Friday versus Arizona and then today versus Boston, they've been going Seguin, Sharp, and Roussel, Ben, Eakin, and Brett Ritchie, and then Faxa, Korpakowski, and Spezza. And then the top power play, surprisingly, has been Ben Hoodler. That's right, Hoodler, Seguin, Esa Lindell. So a lot of interesting notes here. First of all, notice that Spezza and Klingberg have both been off the top power play. They're guys that have been there all year long. Sharp, Lindell, and Hoodler take their spots along with Eve's spot. So three guys that you have to all of a sudden add to your watch list, or at least to your radar. That's Patrick Sharp, Esa Lindell, and Yuri Hoodler. Then we've got Brett Ritchie, Cody Eakin, Roussel, Patrick Sharp, all getting prime spots with Ben and Seguin at even strength. So I feel like all six of these guys I've mentioned, or six or seven, like, are worth at least looking at or talking about. Like, first on the downside, right? Spezza, he had a power play assist versus Arizona, but no shots, and then just 2 shots and no points today versus Boston. I'm really starting, Brian, to be over Jason Spezza, especially if he's now off the top power play and on what looks like the third line with Korpakowski and Faxa. I don't really see a reason to hold on to Spezza unless you're in a really deep league. Then you have Klingberg, who's also bumped from the top power play, but he's really responded. He had a power play goal versus Arizona, I guess on the one that Spezza assisted on the second power play unit. Then he had a goal and an assist today versus Boston, both at even strength. So maybe Klingberg is trying to earn his way back to that top power play. And Esa Lindell, the guy who bumped Klingberg, no power play points yet in these 2 games. He had 2 assists versus Arizona, though, at even strength. Nothing today. I'd be curious to ask you, like, is Esa Lindell now a must-add now that he's on power play 1 with Ben and Seguin and all those guys? Usually my policy is always add a top power play defenseman, especially one playing with Ben and Seguin, but seems kind of weird. Like, maybe Klingberg will just take the job back. So maybe I'll stop there before I just keep naming more players. But I'd be curious to know what you think about Spezza and Klingberg and then Esa Lindell.
Yeah, so Spezza has definitely been fairly disappointing over the last little while. We talked about him last week, so I'm not going to get too far into what we can expect from him. I'm still hopeful he can bounce back, but like you said, he's not really getting the deployment that would lend itself to being an opportunity, to enabling him to really jump back in the scene. Plus, for any Stars, by the way, if you're thinking of adding them right away, hold off, because Tuesday's a really busy day, and I assume all the best Stars are taken, and then they don't play again until I think it's Thursday, Elon, if you have the schedule in front of you. Anyway, you can probably take your time in adding them and see how everybody does Tuesday, and see if John Klingberg is back on that top unit. Esa Lindell being on that top unit is definitely weird. He has 11 points in 53 games this year, and I haven't done the exact math, but I do believe that his power play time on ice from the last 7 games definitely, if you combine all that, it seems to be more than he spent on the power play just about all season long. A lot of zeros. There was a lot of 0-minute outings for him. Sometimes, he's seen a couple minutes here or there, but for the most part, not a lot. So I don't think that they're turning to him to be their next top power play guy. It is interesting, though. I wonder, if Patrick Eves moving had anything to do with this. I can't really make a connection between the two things. So, yeah, I don't think you need to rush to grab Esa Lindell, although I guess while he's on that top power play unit, you have nothing else to lose by adding him. If you have nothing else to lose by adding him, then go ahead and do it. But in the meantime, don't get too down about John Klingberg. John Klingberg. He's going to be okay.
I think so. I hope so. I mean, it's surprising. Klingberg had finally started getting better and doing well after a really slow start and middle of his fantasy season. And now all of a sudden he's bumped from the top power play. But like I said, he's actually doing really well, even though he's not on that top unit. Okay, then some other guys I had mentioned. So Patrick Sharp, he had an assist today. He has 2 assists in his last 3 games. The shots have kept coming lately, usually 2 to 4 shots most games for Patrick Sharp. I think he's a sneaky ad at this point. If he was dropped back when we called him a snoozer like months ago, at this point now, he's playing with Seguin at even strength, and he's on the top power play. Like, why not add Patrick Sharp? I'd probably want him over Spezza at this point. Call me crazy, but especially if your league counts shots, which most leagues do, and then power play points, I don't see why you don't take Patrick Sharp and drop Jason Spezza. And then also you got Yuri Hoodler somehow on the top power play. He's pulling a Sam Gagner. He's playing on the fourth line at even strength, but enjoying prime power play time. He actually had a power play goal and an assist today, and 1 assist versus Arizona. So I wonder if this could maybe last. So I don't know. I still wouldn't buy in on Yuri Hoodler. I'm very surprised that he's up there. But obviously, we saw a couple years ago he had that great year with Calgary, but I was ready to just forget about him completely. But now we've got to look at guys like Hoodler and Sharp and the others we've mentioned as potential guys to add. I definitely like Sharp, though. I think he's my favorite of all of these surprising new top power play guys on Dallas. He's the one I'd rush to add if he's available.
Yeah, if I'm choosing between Sharp and Spezza, you talked, so I'll start over. Are you going to make fun of me for what's happening in the chat?
No, I'm not paying attention. No.
Okay. If I'm choosing a Dallas star aside from Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin, sorry, how did you end that?
Wait, now I am reading what's in the chat room. Like, what's wrong with you, Brian? The quote is, Hansel is so hot right now.
Who's Hansel?
There's a guy in the movie called Hansel.
Is he the bad guy?
And there's a player in the NHL called Hansel.
Well, I get that.
That's why you say the quote from the movie is Hansel. He's so hot right now. So that's why people, when Hansel's doing well in the NHL, they say the same quote, and you're repeating the quote. Don't you get it?
But who's Hansel in the movie?
It's the guy with the big nose.
Is he the bad guy in the movie? Is he like Zoolander's
nemesis? It doesn't matter
nemesis?
because it's just a funny line from the Will Ferrell's character in Zoolander. Hansel's one of the male models, and then Will Ferrell's character, who is the bad guy, every time Hansel comes out,
that's all I've been asking for the last minute. It was Will. It was the nemesis.
Yeah, but Hansel's not the nemesis. Will Ferrell is the nemesis, and when Hansel goes out to do his modeling, Will Ferrell says, oh, that Hansel, he's so hot right now. So that's why it's a funny joke about how Martin Hansel is hot right now. Mugatu is the character. Oh my God. The thing I said was that of all of the Dallas guys, I think I'd like Sharp the best, and I'd even take him over Spezza, and I think Hoodler is interesting, and he's like a Sam Gagner. That's kind of what I said.
Did you mention Roussel or Eakin at all?
No, I didn't even mention those guys.
Okay, great. I agree, Elon. If I'm choosing one star who's not Ben or Seguin or Klingberg, I guess I'm going with Sharp. And then I'd probably still have, I want to say Spetz over Hoodler, but he's worth watching for sure to see what happens. And Elon, we should also talk about, like, with Eves gone, there's an open spot in the top 6, and that may be good news for Cody Eakin, who now doesn't have any of Colton Sevier or Patrick Eves to compete with for a top 6 spot. We know he's been in and out of that spot for the last couple of years. Antoine Roussel, too, could get a little bump in fantasy value, especially if he is playing with Seguin and Sharp more often. He's seen some time with Seguin this year, but also a lot of time with the likes of Radek Faksa and Brett Ritchie. So this is a definite upgrade. Did you know, by the way, that Antoine Roussel might have had the quietest hat trick of the season last week? He had 3 goals on 6 shots against Tampa, but more than 2 shots in a game is not terribly common for him. Don't get too excited, but maybe keep an eye on if there is more opportunity for him now to play in the top 6 with Eves out of the picture.
So if a player gets a hat trick, but he's not on anyone's fantasy teams, did it really happen? It's a very philosophical question.
Do you want me to try to answer?
No. Okay, we can move on. Did you comment on?
Well, I think that's funny. You should leave that.
Okay, I will. Did you comment on what I said about wanting Sharp over Spezza?
Yes. Okay,
so I'll just go on. Oh, let's do an ad now for SeatGeek.
Good call. Phew.
Wow, we've been going for a long time. We've only covered like I guess we're hot right now.
Lots to go.
Okay, so those are the trades. We still have injuries and outjuries and hot streaks and cold streaks. Big show today, I guess, when we had to add these 2 big news items right at the last minute. Before we get into all of the rest, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, SeatGeek. All of these players are trading teams. SeatGeek. All of these players are changing teams, and you probably want to see them. Be the first to see a new player in his new jersey live by going to the game. And, if you want to go to a game, you got to get a ticket. And why not just buy the ticket from the best ticket site out there, which is SeatGeek? They make it so easy to find tickets for all the games you search for. They're going to have tickets aggregated from a bunch of different sites. They'll sort them by value, so you'll even be able to see, oh, this ticket's more expensive, but it's a better value because it usually costs so much more. It's really handy to look at their sorting in that way. Their tickets are backed by their 100% guarantee. They have a really nice, easy-to-use app. Really, it's a good site. Check it out. And especially if you've never used them before, you could get a special $20 rebate just because you're a listener of Keeping Karlsson. All you have to do is download the app or go to the site, buy your ticket, and then in the promo code section, enter the promo code KEEPING, KEEPING. And then SeatGeek will mail you a $20 USA check as a thank you for making your first ticket purchase. So you could get this value. You could help Keeping Karlsson. So be a geek. Get a seat. Check out SeatGeek.
What's left for me to say? I guess I'm on SeatGeek right now, and the time it took you to say that spiel, I went on SeatGeek to see what it would cost to see Martin Hanzal's hopeful first game in a Minnesota Wild jersey tomorrow. At the same time, you might also potentially see Ben Bishop's first game in an LA Kings jersey. LA visits Minnesota. Tickets are all there on SeatGeek. Like you said, Elon, rated by value. The cheapest ticket is out there for $75 US with fees. That's a real handy feature of SeatGeek. No guessing but what the fees will be. Anyway, so there you go. There you have it. So easy. There. SeatGeek.
All right. I guess the real cost is actually going to Minnesota or LA to go see this game. That should be a new feature SeatGeek adds, like telling you ticket prices to go see the games and getting whole packages. How about that, SeatGeek? I'm giving you business ideas. What more do you want? Tweet at Keeping Karlsson if you're SeatGeek and you like the ad that we just did. Okay, Brian, let's move on now to some more outjuries. We talked about Jonathan Quick coming back. Another anticipated outjury happened last week, or I guess yesterday. Erik Johnson finally returned to the Avalanche. He had been out for a while, and perhaps his return was the spark the Avs needed to get their first win in 6 games, a 5-3 win over Buffalo. Maybe the whole season will turn around now that Erik Johnson is back. He had a good game. He picked up an assist. He had a shot, 3 hits, 2 blocks. He only played 17 minutes and 34 seconds, so obviously he's getting eased in a little bit. He's normally averaging close to 22 minutes a game. Johnson, overall on the season, he's up to 12 points in 24 games, which is a very respectable 41-point pace, which is good for a defenseman. Definitely, I think he's worth adding if he's a free agent in your league, and if your league counts hits and blocks. I guess the big question with Johnson coming back is, does his return hurt or help Tyson Barrie? Like, it didn't hurt Tyson Barrie yesterday, as Barrie scored a goal and got the top power play time in the game for a defenseman. Overall, Barrie actually has the same point pace as Johnson with 26 points in 52 games, which is a lot lower than what people were expecting for him going into the year. And in leagues that count plus minus hits and blocks, Barrie has probably been like borderline worth owning because of this low offensive output and no help in peripherals, as opposed to a guy like Erik Johnson, who helps you at least in the hits and blocks. We'll see what he could do in the plus minus. What do you think? At this point, is this good news for Barrie? Bad news for Barrie? Are people dumb for even still having Barrie, even though Colorado can't score goals and they're probably going to be trading away some pieces in the next couple of days?
Well, that's the question. Can the news get any worse for Barrie owners than it has over the last while? I don't think it's any different for Tyson Barrie. If we just look at how he's performed with Johnson in the lineup and without Johnson in the lineup this year, similar sample size of games and similar results. 12 points in 24 games with Johnson in the lineup, 14 points in 28 games without Johnson, so an identical point pace. He was minus 11 with Johnson, minus 16 without, 54 shots with Johnson, 79 shots without. So that's actually the bigger difference. That's the biggest difference. So that's actually the biggest difference, is that he was averaging closer to 3 shots a game with Johnson out of the lineup and closer to 2 shots a game with Johnson in the lineup. So we'll see if that was a function of Johnson leaving the lineup, or if it was just a function of Barrie not really being able to get his game together early on in the season. And he also scored power play points at about the same rate with or without Johnson. His time on ice was similar, a lot of similarities. So I think the only key difference to watch might be to see if Tyson Barrie is taking fewer shots now that Johnson's back. It's very exciting that Erik Johnson's back, though. If anybody dropped him because they had 6 injured guys and no room in their IR, and they just thought they'd sneak him off into free agency and grab him later, you should try and beat them to the punch. You should try and beat them to the punch. Like you said, Elon, he had a very good start to the season, and his start made him like a top 20 defenseman in a lot of formats because of those hits and blocks. If those are both counted, you should absolutely have him rostered.
Yeah, and then since we're on Colorado, like I'm tempted to dive into the forwards, but I feel like someone's going to be getting traded and everything is going to be moot. So I'll just say a couple quick notes. We don't have to dig too much into them. Mikko Rantanen had a stretch of goals in 3 straight games that ended a couple games ago, but then he picked up an assist in the last game, and he has 4 points in his last 5, 16 shots in that span, so over 3 shots a game. So Mikko Rantanen finally producing on a season that's been overall bad for most of the Colorado forwards. He's someone who's finally becoming worth rostering, so take a look and see if he's available in your free agency. I'd imagine his role just becomes even more prominent if Duchesne or Landeskog gets moved, right? That's just... He's already playing in the top 6 and on a good power play, but he'll definitely stay there, maybe, get better line mates. Who knows, like, what would happen? But he's definitely a guy to watch. Regarding Duchesne and Landeskog, I guess you've got to hold on at this point. If you've held them this long, hold on a little longer. See if they get moved on the deadline. See if they get moved at the deadline. See who they go to. Landeskog broke a 5-game pointless drought with 2 goals and assists yesterday, so that should hopefully tide his owners over long enough to wait and see what happens at the trade deadline if they were really close to dropping him. And Duchesne owners, I guess, just need to keep reminding themselves, this used to be a point-per-game guy. Duchesne used to be so good. Just try to remind yourself of that and convince yourself to hold on. I was very close, Brian, to dropping him. As you know, if Chris Letang would have come back from injury yesterday, like it was announced he might, like it was a game-time decision, if he would have come back, I might have just dropped Matt Duchesne in this. I might have just dropped Matt Duchesne in the cacuffle. I'm battling here for my life. I'm in a playoff matchup. That's a 2-week matchup, and we're just ending the first week. So, every game counts, and Matt Duchesne has been doing so little. But at this point, I guess I'm going to try my best to hold on and see if he gets traded to a team that makes him good. Though it's tough because when a player gets traded, you might lose a game just from the travel time. Like Martin Hanzal was supposed to play today for Arizona, but he's not playing, obviously. And then Minnesota plays tomorrow. Is he going to make it? Maybe like Hanzal owners just lose a game because of this trade. So it's tough. Maybe in hindsight, we shouldn't have planned our fantasy hockey playoffs to occur around the trade deadline, but who knows?
Would you like me to comment on that, or Duchesne and Landeskog?
I, Brian, just want you to do what makes you happy.
Okay, well, first I'll say that you wouldn't...
But do it when I'm not talking.
Okay. Oh. Okay, well, first I'll say that I think you're only sad about the trade deadline thing because you might personally lose a game if Hanzal doesn't get into the lineup tomorrow night for Minnesota. I know that's hard, but I also just want you to consider there's some other people affected, like Martin Hanzal and his family. On to Matt Duchesne, who you say he used to be a point-per-game guy.
He knew he was getting traded. I guess Arizona's probably a nice place to live. Nice and temperate weather.
Is temperate the right word?
I don't know. It's hot there. What does temperate mean?
I feel like you're right. I'm just going to keep going, though.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so Matt Duchesne, you said like he's a point-per-game guy, or used to be. Yeah, it's true. For the minority of his career, he's been a point-per-game guy. I see him more as someone who slots in around 60 points, especially while he's with Colorado. Hopefully another team can unlock whatever potential lies within Matt Duchesne. I've given up on seeing it happen in Colorado since, I don't know, they had a point-per-game guy, and they're like, we're going to give you crummy deployment now and not the greatest opportunities and watch you not fulfill your potential. At least that's what I think. I think he can do better. Landeskog, on the other hand, did you bring up Landeskog?
I did.
Okay. Landeskog, on the other hand, he's a guy who I wonder if he really overreached on his potential when he set the bar at 65 points in his 3rd season in the league back in 2013-14. I think he might be closer to a 55-point player, but the fact of the matter is this season, he's been a half-point-per-game guy, and I think he's going to remain that way for as long as he remains on this iteration of the Avs. The Colorado Avalanche are not good for anybody fantasy-wise.
Okay, yeah, let's leave it at that since we're probably going to be talking about at least one of these players next week. Another quick outjury to mention, we freaked out last week about all those Sens injuries. Mark Stone and Mike Hoffman both playing today, so, disregard. Sorry if we freaked you out too much. Okay, let's go to injuries now. Another injury you don't really have to worry about is that Mitch Marner has been out of the Leafs lineup with an upper body injury for the last 5 games, which has led to some interesting implications for the Leafs lineup, a lot of shuffling around. Before we get to that, First I'll mention Marner is probably going to be back next week, so I just wanted to use this as a springboard to talk about the Leafs. Marner's been having such a great season. He has 48 points in 56 games, which, Brian, that's a 70-point pace for Mitch Marner. Normally, that would be enough for him to run away with the Calder Trophy. Like, Nathan MacKinnon won the Calder Trophy easily with, I think, closer to a 60 or 65-point pace, but I wouldn't be surprised if Marner isn't even nominated this season. That's how crazy the rookies are. Obviously, Matthews and Laine, and maybe Marner could sneak in as number 3, but there's another guy even on that team that could challenge. The Leafs, just insane overall, right? So, okay, with Marner out, JVR and Bozak have been pretty quiet. Probably not a coincidence. That's the line they've been going, Marner, JVR, and Bozak, and they've all been clicking together. So I wouldn't be too worried if you're a James Van Riemsdyk owner, because Marner's going to be back, and you can sort of reset to whatever was happening before Marner got injured. One of the guys who really stepped up in Marner's absence is a guy named Josh Levo, who finally got into the lineup and had a stretch of 1 goal and 7 assists and 18 shots in 5 games, which is insane. He was playing with Kadri and Komarov, who have both been on fire as well. In the last couple of games, Levo has quieted down with 0 points and only 2 shots in those 2 games. And probably I wouldn't be too excited about him moving forward, because once Marner comes back, I think he's going to get bumped. Normally, Nylander would have been the third on the Kadri and Komarov line, but I guess they had to shuffle everything. And so Nylander has been up with Matthews, who, by the way, is even hotter than all of the rest that I've been mentioning. And then Hyman. So it's been it's confusing keeping track of all these names. So it's been Nylander, Matthews, and Hyman, and then JVR's been playing with Bozak and Connor Brown, and then Bozak got injured last game, or he was ill, so a guy named Ben Smith took his place. But anyway, so first of all, Josh Levo, since he's the one that's most likely to be in free agency, is there any value in adding him at this point, or do you think that once Marner comes back, he goes back to like going in the press box and not even playing? Like if they go back with JVR, Marner, and Bozak, and then Kadri, Komarov, and Nylander, and then Matthews with Brown and Hyman, that wouldn't really leave Levo with anywhere to play.
That would leave him.
Oh, sorry. Let me say. Unless you think maybe someone could get bumped. Maybe like a Brown or Hyman could get bumped off the Matthews line.
Those are the 2 most likely candidates, I suppose, but there is not a lot of room for Levo to find his place in the lineup. In fact, it took him a really long time to get this far. We were remiss not to mention him on last week's episode, because he's on a huge high in a season where he'd been so down for so long. He was injured before the season, and then Mike Babcock called him out in the preseason, saying he was pretty far from making the lineup. He was scratched for 2 weeks to start the year, then went down to the AHL on a conditioning stint, had no points in 5 games with the Marlies. Then he sat in the Leafs press box for another month, from November to January. Then he finally, from November to December, then he finally played 12 minutes in December, waited 2.5 weeks more to play 4 minutes in his next game. And then after a month, and then a month after that, he played again on February 9th, and he's now played in 9 straight contests. That sounds like a small feat to play 9 straight, but it's a big deal after Levo played a total of 5 games in the AHL and 16 minutes in the NHL over 4+ months. His ice time is holding reasonably steady right now, and I like him for some depth contribution as long as he's playing with Kadri and Komarov, but I do fear that once Marner is back, he might not be long for a spot in the top 9, and in that case, it'll be back to the press box for him. As for Marner, by the way, before we get too far ahead of the other Leafs we're going to talk about, I just want to say, can I, like, even if I sort of semi-rescinded my prediction out of fear, can I still pat myself on the back for saying he could be the highest scoring Leafs rookie, even though he is on pace to score just few. Like, I get that he's on pace to score just 2 fewer points than Austin Matthews over 82 games. I should admit at the same time that Austin Matthews is having a much better season than I gave him credit for in our preseason episodes. But Mitch Marner has been incredible. You can see him making a couple rookie mistakes from time to time, but you can also see him looking poised and confident enough with the puck to make some big and really creative plays, I'm sure we all saw that one where he like looped around the zone like Marian Hossa did with the Sens like 10 or 12 years ago before setting up a play that I think led to a goal. The goal wasn't even the important part. It was the journey, not the destination for that play.
You know that like last couple sentences is going to be like 5 minutes of editing because you had to stop every 2 words.
Do you want me to try again?
No, whatever. Okay. It's hard. Sorry. You're so excited about Mitch Marner.
I am excited about Mitch Marner.
This like part where you said to pat yourself. I wanted to chime in and be like, you can't pat yourself on the back because you can't even say the sentence. But okay. Sorry.
Well, at least my internet is working.
That's nice. Okay. Brian, sure, pat yourself on the back. if okay, well, Brian. Okay, no. So Brian, I'd say sure you would be able to pat yourself on the back. I'd give you a pass on, if Marner ends up with less points than Matthews just because he was injured for a few games. And if the point pace for Marner was higher, I'd say totally pat yourself on the back for making that call, except you totally rescinded it and you took it back after a while. So I don't think you get to hold on to that.
I didn't totally rescind it. I just felt like I put my neck really far out there for no reason. But I wish I stuck by it. Oh well, yeah, lesson learned.
That's the thing with putting your neck out. You have to leave it out. Otherwise, it's not really anything. But okay, the Leafs, it's just insane, right? They currently have 6 players with at least 7 points in their last 7 games. That's insane, right? So Matthews, Levo, Jake Gardiner, Kadri, Komarov, Nylander, all have been above a point per game in the last couple of weeks. It's just insane how many fantasy producers they have. They're like the Minnesota Wild, right? The Minnesota Wild of the Eastern Conference. It's hard to even think of a question to ask you about all these Leafs. I feel like, you probably just kind of want them all. Like Komarov is obviously especially interesting with this production he's been having since he produces so many hits. And so if you're in a hits league and you could get a point per game pace from him in short bursts, might as well grab Komarov. Here's my question, Brian. If I had to pick one, should people be picking Austin Matthews in the first round of their drafts next year? Let's say if it's a 14-team league, can he crack the top 14? In a one-year league, is there much difference at this point between him and other guys who are normally picked in the first round, like say John Tavares, Pavelski, Giroux, Gaudreau? Matthews now has 54 points. Matthews now has 54 points in 61 games, which is a 73-point pace. And he had a slow stretch at the beginning of the year. I'm sure if you take out the first couple of months, it would be above a point per game pace. Plus, he has 217 shots in these 61 games, which is insane. I'm curious to know, how many points do you think he's going to end up with this year? And then how many next year? Can he hit the 73 points this year? Do you think he can keep this pace up? And then is he going to be a point per game guy moving forward for the rest of his career? Your sound's off. Your sound's still off. You're muted.
I got it. Did you want to mention those other elite player names so I can stack him up against them specifically?
I said it's in the doc here. I said Tavares.
No, I know, but you want to throw it. Did you say them?
Yeah, I said it.
Oh, I missed it. Sorry.
Okay.
How good can he be? Austin Matthews is 19 years old. That's how I'm going to start it. He's only going to turn 20 in September of this year. And the reason I started by mentioning his age, we're all wowed, wow, young rookie playing well. We've heard this story before, but not often do they play this well. Since 2005, only 3 players younger than 20 years old have reached 70 points. Crosby did it twice as an 18 and 19-year-old. Then Patrick Kane as a 19-year-old. And then Steven Stamkos was the most recent player to accomplish the feat 7 years ago. So it hasn't happened since then. And it's also just as uncommon, by the way, for a 20-year-old player to get 70 points. So Matthews really deserves some mad props for what he is accomplishing this year. As for next year, that's the question, right? Where do you draft him? Where can you value him? The sophomore slump thing scares me a bit, but I think he's going to be able to work through it for the most part. He's got a good shot of holding his own with any of those names you mentioned. The one thing that I wonder about in his numbers this year is his 87% IPP, which is either elite or it's a bit of a fluke, and he's gotten lucky to be in on so many goals while he's on the ice. From what I've seen and what I've read and what I know, I am ready to guess that 87% IPP is not a fluke, that he can keep it up there. I'm ready to call him a 65-plus point guy going forward for sure, with upside for 75. And I'm laughing because that really is unfairly conservative.
That's ridiculous.
You'll have no hope of drafting him if that's where you have him pegged, since there are plenty of other people who see him as guaranteed 70 points with upside of point per game. They'll pick him off the board way earlier than that. So first or second round. So I guess if you're comparing him, Elon, to those other elite guys you mentioned that go in the top couple rounds already, I think it's to Matthews' benefit compared to them directly. We look at Tavares, Giroux, Gaudreau, they rarely have opponents keying in on any line but their own, whereas Matthews, the Leafs have a pretty evenly distributed top 9. And I think that's a little bit of a bonus for him. So I'm going to go, and I think that's a bonus for him. So I'm going to go ahead in this long, convoluted way, first saying 65 points and then point per game. I'm going to say he's guaranteed. Am I putting my neck out again? I'm going to say he's guaranteed to get more than 70 points next year, and I think he could crack 75.
Okay, yeah, I like that better. That 65 thing was like, yeah, I think that Connor McDavid is at least a 65-point guy. It's like, yeah, no shoot. How do you say that without swearing? I don't actually know the nice version of that saying. But okay. By the way, Brian, Dave in the chat room here was saying he's surprised something as foolish as sophomore slump worries the fantasy hockey robot. You know, so my, I guess, what's the word? My,
reaction, response.
What's the word when you're helping someone? Defense. I'm so bad. Okay. My defense for the sophomore slump, I guess, to me, at least in my head, I would say maybe other teams are getting to know the player. Like Austin Matthews was a mystery and coaches didn't know how to coach against him. But now, they're going to figure out what he's been like and they'll have all summer to watch his game video. I don't know, Brian, do you have a defense to what Dave is saying, maybe calling you being foolish for worrying about the sophomore slump?
Yeah, I always thought it was a myth. And then, I can't remember. It was an interview we did towards the start of this show where somebody I trusted who talked about how the sophomore slump, they felt it was a real thing because other teams have more time to prepare to defend this player in their second year in the league. Maybe they're coming in with a bit of overconfidence. They don't feel like they have to work as hard because they did it as a rookie. I don't think that's going to apply to Austin Matthews, but it is something that I think holds some weight in the sense that other teams have tape of this player. They have tape of him playing in the NHL. And yeah, they can better ready their team to play against them. But someone as good as Austin Matthews, I don't know if that's enough to stop him from getting to 70 points.
Right, yeah. Right, I'm not too concerned about that myself, but I don't know. We'll see. It should be a lot of fun seeing all of these big stars on the Leafs. Maybe next year you could put your neck out and say that Marner will get more points than Matthews and we can do this all over again the right way. Okay, another injured guy who should be back soon is Chris Letang. But I'm just saying this for completeness. Like, I actually don't want to talk about Chris Letang and his injuries. When I saw last week that Letang was injured and was going to miss a game, I didn't even react. Just like, fine, go in my IR. I'll pick up Goligoski or whoever and just hope for the best. And Goligoski's actually been good. So it's not even bothering me. Like, I'm over getting bothered by Chris Letang getting injured. I've learned my lesson for drafting next year. Hopefully he'll be back. If not, okay, I'll hang on to Goligoski. Okay, Justin Schultz, though, he returned yesterday in the 4-2 win over Philly after missing 3 games. He was on the top power play, of course, but got 0 points and only 1 shot. I was saying, Brian, before when Letang was back, that I was starting to think maybe you have to expect Schultz to slow down, especially once he was losing that top power play time and he had started to slow down. Now, obviously, you want to hold on to him while Letang is injured. We got an interesting question on the Facebook group, though, about Schultz versus Colton Parayko at this point. And it really made me think, because I feel like there's so many unknowns to consider if you're thinking of making that swap or making that trade. Justin Schultz versus Colton Parayko. So many unknowns, right? First of all, you have the unknowns of Letang's health. Like, is Letang going to be there? That affects Schultz a lot in terms of if he's going to get on that top power play. Then you have Kevin Shattenkirk, who might get traded. And obviously that answer will come soon. But obviously the person making the trade maybe wants to do it now before they find out, because that's the thing. They're rolling the dice. So I'm curious to get your thoughts. Like, I really struggled with that question, to be honest. Like, Parayko has been having a decent second season, but not like overwhelming, like not compared to the way people talk about him in our patron-only Facebook group. He has 28 points in 60 games for a 38-point pace, which is decent for a defenseman, but not like insane, not blowing anyone away. 140 shots, which is nice, a little over 2 shots a game. His numbers were looking better before, but recently he only has 2 assists in his last 8 games. So maybe if we had this conversation a couple weeks ago, it'd go a bit differently. I feel like now could be, though, a really good time to buy low on Colton Parayko in like a keeper league before Kevin Shattenkirk gets moved, because I assume he gets on the top power play over Pietrangelo, right? So if that happens, Parayko versus Schultz, I guess I'd be curious to know your thoughts overall, and then maybe like for all the different permutations, like if Letang is healthy, and if he's not, then if Shattenkirk is traded, and if he's not, who do you like better between those 2 guys?
I'm going to take Colton Parayko. I think it's a great time to get him. He's not the guy in St. Louis yet, but he's really making the most of the time that he does get still, as he did in his rookie year. He has a 38-point pace. He's a 38-point pace in not the top spot for scoring defensively on a team that has had their share of scoring issues outside of Vladimir Tarasenko, and that's impressive to be able to do to be able to get to 38 points. Like, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but in his context, I think it's good. And his value really gets a nice bump from his shot rates. He's top 10 amongst defensemen in even strength shot attempts per 60 minutes, and he's top 20 amongst defensemen in points and shots on goal per 60. He's also top 15 in power play points per 60. So when he does get those looks on the power play, he makes the most of them. I will assume that Letang comes back soon enough to negate Schultz's extra value, and looking at both Parayko and Schultz as second fiddles on their own team, I prefer Parayko.
Yeah, I think that seems fair. Maybe we don't have to go over all 4 permutations. I guess we could just say we think Letang will come back for what that's worth, and then we think Shattenkirk should get moved. So it makes sense. And even if Shattenkirk doesn't get moved, Parayko still gives you those shots. Schultz was also taking a lot of shots. It's tough. It's an interesting question. I mentioned Pietrangelo. He only has 2 assists in his last 9 games, both coming in the game versus Montreal a couple of weeks ago. I still like him, like, as a really solid non-power play defenseman. But I asked you, like, I think it's pretty clear that Parayko takes the top power play spot if Shattenkirk moves. So is Pietrangelo, I guess his value stays the same, right? Like, almost a lock for 2 or 3 blocks a game, gets points usually, even though he's in a slump right now, takes a decent amount of shots. I'd imagine some people are thinking of letting him go with this current cold streak, especially if blocks aren't counted. But he has 29 points in 59 games overall, so around that Colorado D 0.5 per game pace. Curious to know what you think about Pietrangelo and if his value changes if Shattenkirk gets moved or not.
I don't think so. I don't think he steps into a bigger role. I imagine that Parayko steps into Shattenkirk's spot, and then Pietrangelo keeps playing very capably in the support role where he picks up a decent amount of points, which are bolstered by good peripheral value if your league counts those.
All right, so we're through the injuries and oucheries section. Let's go to some hot streaks, Brian. I have a few names I'm curious to get your thoughts on. I want to start in Chicago. I actually feel really bad. I feel like we blew it last week by not mentioning Panik and Schmaltz. Like, they were already on hot streaks, and I had them in the list of guys to talk about. Then I sort of cut them at the last minute. I'm going to blame it on my traveling and just think, I'm sure it's not that important. But no, these guys are really good. Like, their line with Jonathan Toews has been on fire lately. Like, before today, Panik had 10 points in his last 7 games, and Schmaltz 9 points in his last 7 games. And they're playing currently, and I saw that Jonathan Toews scored a goal assisted by Nick Schmaltz and Richard Panik. So the hits keep coming. Jonathan Toews, by the way, insane. He has already a goal and an assist today, a power play assist on a Patrick Kane goal. And he's like on another level right now than all the other players we've been talking about, I think. He's doing even better than Austin Matthews, if that's possible. He has 14 points in his last 7. That's before today in his 2 points. Obviously, the 3-goal and 2-assist game versus Minnesota helped. That and being on the top power play with Kane and Panarin is really great for him. He wasn't always on that top power play. So let's talk about him first. Brian, back on episode 133, when I brought up another Toews hot streak, you said, sell high, now's the time. He's not better than a 60-point guy. Obviously, if people listened to you and sold him at that point, they're kicking themselves right now because they've lost out on 14 points over the last couple of weeks. But maybe you still feel that it was a smart move overall. I'm curious to know, like, what happened here? Did we miss something about Jonathan Toews? Or do you still think he's a guy that shouldn't be expected to get more than 60-point pace? And remember, he's right now on a 160-point pace over the last couple of weeks.
Wow, if he can keep that up the rest of the season, you are really set if you have him and kicking yourself if you don't. You said, what did we miss? Like, how did we not see it coming? I don't know. Like, his numbers over the past 2 years had been pretty steady and reliable, pointing to him as a 55, maybe 60-point guy, and not much changed going into this season. We know he started off pretty cool, cooler than he should have been, and now he's hotter than I think he should be. But if you look, like, it's not just a recent thing. It's not just the last week. Or, well, the last week certainly helps him get up to 32 points over his last 30 games with 7 power play points. And what's very nice is 88 shots to go with that. We should give him credit for his increased shot rates this year. He's taking more shot attempts per 60 minutes this year than at any point over the last 4 seasons. He's got a beastly 25 shots over his last 7 games and a lot of 4 or 5 shot efforts in there, even a couple 7-shot games. I'll be honest, if I were looking at his numbers blind, not knowing it's Jonathan Toews that I'm looking at, I would be open to suggesting that he could keep up his current near 70-point pace. But knowing what I know about Jonathan Toews, I still reflexively expect him to really level off to like 55, 60-point pace again. But maybe I'll put him on the higher end of that now, because I don't think Panik and Schmaltz are 2 guys who can really keep things going with Taves for so long. Like we talked about Anisimov last year, he has Panarin and Kane. Taves has Taves. And I guess, you hope there's some scoring upside with Panik and Schmaltz. And by the way, it was a real missed opportunity, not just because Schmaltz continued to have a good week and has another point tonight, Elon, that we didn't bring him up on the show last week, but it's just so much fun to say Schmaltz. We missed a chance to say it more often. So I'll take advantage of it now. Schmaltz. I like him a little more than I do Panik, but I think he may not be as good as some of the more depth options on the Blackhawks. He has just 16 points in 42 games, and I think he'll go as far as Taves takes him. He really hasn't been one of the most offensive guys on the Blackhawks. Like if you rate their forward core, he's towards the bottom in a lot of measures. And if you look at guys like Ryan Hartman and Vinny Hinostroza, they're actually looking better going by their shot and point scoring rates at even strength on the season. And Panik I see is kind of like a Komarov. Started off the year hot, then he cooled, now he's hot again. I kind of expect the pattern to repeat itself, but he can offer some peripheral value along the way. Even if he starts going cold and your league counts hits, you can take advantage of getting those.
Yeah, like it's hard to expect Panik and Schmaltz to keep this up. And Taves has had a number of different line mates throughout the year. Like Marian Hossa was normally playing with Jonathan Taves, and he's been in the bottom six. Who knows if things slow down, maybe Hossa gets back up there. But for now, I mean, if Panik and Schmaltz are both available for you in free agency, you have to take a look at them at least while they're rolling. Like I said, like over a point per game over the past couple of weeks, and they're playing with one of the highest. And they're playing with one of the hottest guys in the league in Jonathan Taves. They probably shouldn't be free agents for you. I'd actually take Panik over Schmaltz just because he's actually been the one also on the top power play. Actually, I saw that Seabrook was bumped in the last game. They were going 4 forwards and Duncan Keith, and Panik was there instead of Seabrook. So if you could get him while that's lasting, I would definitely want him. Plus, he gives you some hits. And then Schmaltz also good, playing on this good line. Top line, hey, on Chicago, maybe we'll see if something changes at the trade deadline. But yeah, two interesting guys. Normally, it's hard to find such high producers that were such nobodies all season long so late in the season. So here's your chance potentially, and you could ride them out maybe for the first week or two of your fantasy playoffs. He had an assist on Thursday versus Arizona, and he has 6 points in his last 9 games with 20 shots, which seems pretty good. I'm curious, is that basically what we can expect from him moving forward? Like if he's in the bottom 6, can we still expect like a 55-point pace, or is maybe even that too high for him? Like he's a third liner. He's playing with Hartman and Kiro or like Kruger and Rasmussen. Like if Marian Hossa can't crack the top 6 and get back with Jonathan Taves, should people be dropping him? I dropped him in my couple division. I think you had him as well, Brian. Did you drop him?
I did drop him with the bye week that was coming up. Yeah, I think you've got it right. Like all season long, he's really fluctuated from being nothing to something to nothing to something. I guess that all does wash out to like a 50, 55-point player. He isn't a huge fall off this year, but especially on the third line away from Taves. Although if he does get to play with Hinostroza or Hartman, I just suggested that those guys are better line mates, maybe, than Schmaltz. At least they take more shots.
Okay, and for the next sorry.
Wait, but I'll finish that. I guess they take more shots. Actually, no, just leave it there. That's fine.
Okay, for the next hot streak, I want to go to Nashville. Let's talk about how we're finally seeing some offense out of their top D-men in Roman Josi and PK Subban. Going into today, top power play Roman Josi. He scored 2 goals yesterday versus Washington, had 2 assists the game before versus Colorado. He's riding a 4-game point streak, and he has 12 points in his last 10 games. He also has 35 shots in that span and 20 blocks. Like I said, that was actually not including today because Nashville played today against Edmonton. They won 5-4. I'm checking right now. Roman Josi, 2 assists. There you go. That's 3 straight games of 2 points for Roman Josi. So he is officially on fire, doing so well. He slumped a bit earlier in the year, but is now up to 34 points in 52 games. So make that 36 points in 53 games. So like around a 55-point pace, which is fantastic for a defenseman, especially one that can give you some blocks, like around 2 blocks a game. Nothing to sneeze at. I feel like we can expect at least a 55-point. I feel like we can expect at least a 55-point pace like this moving forward for Roman Josi. If he's on the top power play with all these other Nashville guys who are heating up, we're going to get to Arvidsson and Forsberg. I feel like 55-point pace is like his floor moving forward and upside for maybe hitting 60. Brian, do you concur?
I concur.
Okay, and then we have PK Subban, who has 1 goal and 9 assists for 10 points in his last 8 games. And let's update that for today. 2 assists today. So yeah, they keep rolling. It's fantastic, especially for a guy like Subban, who was injured and then wasn't doing much. Finally, he's producing and making it worth the high draft pick that a lot of people spent on him. He now has 30 points in 46 games, which is like a 52, 53 point pace. I'd be curious to know also what point pace you expect for PK Subban moving forward, like better or worse than Roman Josi? Like, who would you actually prefer between the two of them in a keeper league? Let's say if the league counts shots and blocks.
So my knee jerk, my gut is to say Subban immediately, but then I take a look and I'm not so sure. Subban's actually a year older than Roman Josi, so if you're looking for youth, I mean, there's marginally less with Subban. I also want to like Subban more for shots and points. But Roman Josi is keeping up with points, and he's really outshooting him. So I think I'm actually going to go with Roman Josi between the two. I still think Subban has the higher upside. Like, if one of them is going to get 60 or more points in a season, it's going to be PK Subban. But until Subban's running the top power play, I can't say I like him more than Josi.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And also, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Like all season long, Subban hasn't been on the top power play. And now things are finally clicking. So they're not going to change it now. Who knows? Now that I said this, maybe things will swap in a little while and the Josi owners will be mad at me. Okay, but since we're on Nashville, one player I'm sure has been involved in many of these defenseman points is Filip Forsberg. He had a goal and and 2 assists versus Washington yesterday, and then two straight hat tricks for his 2 games before that versus Colorado and Calgary. So he is just insane. 3 straight 3-point games. What? And actually, that's not including today. Only a goal today. So Filip Forsberg clearly slowing down with only a goal. Like, he's just on such an amazing pace. Remember when people were worried about him earlier in the year? Like, he was on a cold streak and people were talking about dropping him. I'm pretty sure we said not to, and I'm really glad we did. That would have been a horrible move, almost as bad as Jade here in the chat room having dropped Austin Matthews earlier in the year. But yeah, even with this run, he's only up to 46 points in 62 games for like a 60-point pace this year. I think he's showing he's better than that at this point, right, Brian? Like, I wouldn't be surprised to see Peter Forsberg. I would be surprised to see Filip Forsberg and closer to 70 points than 60, even with all those pointless games he had early on. Like, I'm not even talking pace at this point. I could see Filip Forsberg get 70 points this year, which would mean close to a point per game pace moving forward. Am I crazy?
You are not crazy. We had Filip Forsberg as a guy with near certainty for 65 points with upside for maybe 5 more, and that would get you to what you're saying right now. Of course, 7 goals on his last 11 shots. They've put him back on track for a second consecutive 30-goal season. And if you're thinking, well, that's unsustainable, there's no way. You can find other places in his game this year that he can grow. He has only 7 power play points to date. Nashville is scoring essentially at the same... Nashville is scoring power play goals at essentially the same rate as they were last season when they scored 51 on the whole year. And Forsberg finished that year with 23 power play points. So 7 power play points. He's off pace, even though Nashville's scoring just as many. So I think he can still pick up a few more power play points. Like, he's still on that top unit. His IPP is down a bit. So if you're thinking, sorry, I got this. So again, if you find his sudden scoring surge distasteful because it's not being accompanied by enough shots and it came a little too out of the blue for you, don't, because he's missing out in other places too. I still think he remains in near certainty for 65 points with upside of 70.
Yeah, Filip Forsberg, so good. And then I feel like we can't mention Nashville and not talk about Victor Arvidsson, who just keeps producing. He's up to 43 points in 59 games. And I keep having to remind myself that I wrote this before today's game. I really should have updated this. Arvidsson, a goal today. So he's rolling as well. I guess when Nashville scores 5 goals, you'd expect everyone to get it on at least one. So clearly, I feel like Arvidsson, he's a must-add if he's somehow still available in your league. We've been talking about him all year. I think there's no doubt at this point he's going to be valuable to you going into your playoffs. You need to add him. I don't even know if there's anything else to say about him.
No, except that he's scoring goals at like the same rate as Filip Forsberg. He just didn't do it with 2 so flashy hat tricks. He has 10 goals and 8 assists for 18 points in his last 17 games, 53 shots, and has been essentially a point-per-game player over the whole year, save for a 10-game cold snap that began just before Hanukkah.
Okay. Yeah, Yeah, actually, I haven't mentioned this yet, but Brian, we're going to be putting a bonus item at the end of this episode. One of our patrons, Dave, recorded his own podcast, and we decided it's the first episode. It's a ad drop sort of streaming podcast. So I'll say it again. It's like a podcast about who you need to stream for a specific week. So he's only looking at the next week and talking about who you can add and drop for your team. It's pretty good. I had a lot of fun listening to it. I'm bringing it up now because he has some very interesting advice about Arvidsson and Forsberg. So you'll know what I'm talking about when you get there. Okay, Brad, I want to go to the Rangers now. A guy who's maybe not as exciting, but still finally producing again, Brady Shea. Kind of just like the beginning of the year at this point. Before today, he had 12 points in his last 16 games, taking 2 shots on goal also most games, as opposed to only around the 1 or 0 he had when his hot streak was going. I remember thinking, yeah, you could add Shea, but you're not going to get anything aside from some assists. But at least now he's getting assists and an okay amount of shots, enough to like not really hurt you in that category if you're like wasting a roster spot on him. Curious to know if you think he's worth adding at this point. He's also getting some second unit power play time, which is not bad considering like Rick Nash and JT Miller and Kevin Hayes are on that second power play unit. Is this production from Brady Shea sustainable or fleeting?
I'm going to go with fleeting. You mentioned that he has been seeing some power play time, but only one of these 12 points in this run came on the power play, so not making the most of that time. And you can see he's gotten an uptick in on-ice shooting percentage in this run, just like during his first run that we covered earlier in this year. So that's why I'm saying fleeting, but I'm also good with getting him on your roster while the getting is good. That's the end of my sentence. I ended it with a different inflection than normal.
Oh, that was weird. Okay. Hey.
Did you hear me? Do you want me to repeat it?
No, I'm just going to move on unless you think there's something I should respond to.
No, great call.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, okay. Next, I wanted to mention Vladislav Nemesnikov. We're going down in name value a little bit as the show goes on, but don't worry, we'll end with some big names in the cold streak section. But Nemesnikov, he's doing it again. Goals in each of his last 3 games. I'm just telling you this to tell you that I'm not buying in this time. We brought him up too many times before. He goes on a hot streak. We mentioned him on the show. Then he does nothing. And anyone who picked him up because of us just hates us a little bit more, especially now that even though he's on this streak, in his last game, he was playing with Point and Killorn, and he wasn't on the top power play. So it's not even like Nemesnikov is on a Kucherov line like he was before when we were recommending him. So forget about him. Let someone else pick him up. One guy who is kind of intriguing me a little bit on Tampa, though, is defenseman Jake Dotchin. He's a guy I'd never heard of before, but he's seeing over 50% of the power play time in each of the last 4 games. Also over 20 minutes of regular ice time in his last 3 games. So out of nowhere, he's becoming a pretty significant player on the team. He's played only 13 games overall on the season and only has 3 assists. But do you see any upside for more given his increased role? And I think, especially if your league counts hits, you have to consider adding him because he has 36 hits in 13 games. Like, he's a very solid bet for at least 2 or 3 hits every game. He's had a couple games where he's even higher than that. So, Brian, why don't you give a quick scouting report on Jake Dotchin, defenseman of the Tampa Bay Lightning?
Yeah, I think if you're in a hits league, he's worth looking at. I think otherwise, not so much. Anton Strawman is usually the guy who gets secondary power play time in Tampa, but not at the moment. You wonder if the Bolts are looking to bolster their power play to see what their in-house options are like. The word going around earlier this week was that they had a sign-and-trade deal set up for Shattenkirk, but Shattenkirk was not into the idea. I mean, it was 7 years, $6 million per year, and maybe he feels like he can fetch more on the open market. I can't blame him for wanting to test it. But we did just see, going back to Tampa, we saw Victor Hedman go 16 games without a power play point from the end of December all the way into the start of February. I wonder if that played a part in Tampa, both looking at Shattenkirk and now maybe giving Dotchin a try. I'm just trying to connect some dots here, though. Maybe I'm letting my imagination run wild a little bit because Dotchin has never really shown the pedigree of a high-end power play quarterback. He seems to be a guy who could do like a half-decent job of it, but it's not quite but it doesn't seem like it's something that would be his forte.
Okay, and just another name that we'll throw out there. At least, if nothing else, you learn about a new player in the NHL, even if you don't plan on picking him up. And I wanted to end the hot streak section by mentioning Brian's favorite goalie, Eddie Lack. got only his second start since returning from injury on Friday, and he shut out the Ottawa Senators 3-0. 34 saves, a really good game for Eddie Lack. Believe it or not, he didn't have as good of a result today. He got the second start in a row, which looked very nice versus Calgary, but it was a 3-1 loss. He only made 21 saves, so an .875 save percentage. That's more Eddie Lack-like. That's the Eddie Lack that we've been seeing all throughout the season in the times he's played. Less than 900 save percentage. Anyway, worth mentioning, Cam Ward. Like, there's a reason why Eddie Lack got 2 straight games. It's not only because he got a shutout. It's also because Cam Ward has an .887 save percentage over the past 2 months. That's 21 games. So I still think it's a nice opportunity for Lack to step up and at least get more games. Like, maybe Cam Ward doesn't need to play like 10 games in a row if they have a backup goalie who can get a shutout on occasion. Is it time for people that are in deep leagues to potentially add Eddie Lack? Brian, I feel like I ask you this every once in a while just because you love him so much.
I thought he played today. Did he not play?
He did. I talked about it. I said that he had an .875 save percentage, and it was more Lack-like.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, you say he's my favorite goalie, and I think he was my favorite option coming into the season as a goalie you could pick up late and get value out of. That hasn't happened, and I'm at the point where I've given up on Eddie Lack as a member of the Carolina Hurricanes for the most part. Now, I do like a lot of what he tweets. He's a funny guy, seems to have a good personality, and he was great on the Canucks, and I feel like he might be great on his next team, but I'm really hesitant to go off of one good start, even as someone who I really want to succeed and I backed a lot. So, it'd look really good on me if he suddenly did start playing well. Yeah, I'm ambivalent. I'm not rushing to pick him up myself. That said, it is hard to do worse than Cam Ward has been over the last while. So, of course, as always, I think the Hurricanes should keep giving him a run until, I don't know, I feel like Cam Ward has just been kneecapping every goalie who's challenged for the number 1 spot for the last 10 years. It's the only way to explain it. He's like cutting holes in their equipment secretly or putting some performance, what's the opposite of enhancer?
Detriment
in their pregame meal, something like that. Eddie Lack is better than this, but I don't know if he can be better than this with Carolina.
Okay, well, Brian, I mean, you did text me after that shutout being like, hey, how about that Eddie Lack? So I put him down for you. I'm still going to refer to him. You did.
I did not.
Check our Google Hangout conversation. Search for Eddie Lack. You have a short memory, I guess. I'm still going to refer to him as Brian's favorite goalie, Eddie Lack, I think from here on out for the rest of my life. I hope that's okay with you. Let's go to cold streaks now. Claude Giroux. Got to bring him up. It's sad, but we have to. He only has 43 points in 61 games this year, which is a 58-point pace. I think that many people would have taken the over if you made a 60-point over-under going into the season. He only has 2 assists in his last 9 games. Is this just like a Philly thing? And maybe once Philly bounces back, if they can even, like, he'll be fine? Or is there something wrong with Claude Giroux? Like, once you look into his numbers, is this a guy that's going to be able to go back to being the at least 70-point guy, closer to point per game guy? Or do you think maybe 60-point Claude Giroux is the new existing Claude Giroux?
It is a bit of a Philly thing, and I've been a Giroux fan for a long time, so of course I'm going to go to bat for him. His 10-game rolling even strength on-ice shooting percentage has been at 3% for like a month now. And we can expect it, or we should expect it, to be able to be closer, like somewhere around 7 or 8%. It's at 3%. And somebody like Brady Shea, who's doing really well, it's up at like 11 or 12%. So 3% is incredibly low. But Giroux is a guy who has suffered through a sub 7% on-ice shooting percentage in Philadelphia for 3 years now. So it's not like we can even expect a huge regression bounce back from 3 to 9 or something. It's a huge regression bounce back from 3 to 9 or something. It's going to be 3 to 7. But it is still worth noting that he and his line mates have been especially terrible at converting shots to goals recently. In fact, his output of 140 points in the last 2 seasons goes from, okay, I'll take it, to kind of impressive when you see that he ranks 135th out of 143 forwards in even strength on-ice shooting percentage since the start of the 2014-15 season. And that's amongst all forwards who've played at least 200 games. If you didn't catch all that, what I'm saying is Claude Giroux has put up a lot of points with a very low on-ice shooting percentage. His problems do go beyond just that, though. I see declining shot rates, declining shot attempt rates, low individual shooting percentage, low IPP. The last two of those should even out with regression, but the declining shots and shot attempts are a little concerning as Giroux does begin navigating the downward part of the aging curve that he has arrived at as a 29-year-old. I think something's kind of broken in Philadelphia, and I hope it'll be fixed in the offseason, if not sooner. And if you ask me in the offseason, I'll tell you he still is one of my candidates for a bounce back. He just turned 29 a month ago. So while age may be somewhat at play, I don't think it accounts for this entire drop-off. And I also don't think that peak 29 or 30-year-old Claude Giroux is this bad. I think he can be better. And so I'm already looking to next season. Good time to grab him low if you're in a keeper league.
Okay, 1-year league next year, you're drafting for the cupful, and you have the option to either have Giroux or Austin Matthews. Who do you take?
If the Flyers change their coach, I'll still go Austin Matthews, but it'll be a tougher decision for me. If they go into next season with everything mostly the same behind the bench, I would definitely take Austin Matthews. If they change, I'll still take Austin Matthews.
Okay, what a twist. I thought you were going to say Giroux there. Okay, speaking of guys on maybe the wrong side of the aging curve, you posted something kind of distressing on our Facebook group today, and I had to bring it up. You were saying that maybe Alex Ovechkin is starting to slow down, and you mentioned how he's had some zero-shot games lately. Brian, we have him in our joint league as our top keeper, and he's like been the top keeper by a lot because this league, gives extra points for goals and then points for hits and like all the things he does. Should we be starting to be thinking of selling Alex Ovechkin while we still can for the high price? Like, what is all this? Like, is he actually slowing down, or is this just like a little bit of a cold streak recently? Like, come on, it's Alex Ovechkin. I was so excited just a few weeks ago reading about how if he keeps up this pace, he's going to break a lot of records for most goals ever if he could keep doing what he's doing up until he's like 35 or 36. So, come on, Brian. Tell me what's going on here.
Well, up until a couple weeks ago, you only needed one hand and a thumb to count how many times he'd gone an entire game without registering a shot on goal in his career, and that's been a huge part of his fantasy value. Now, though, over the last 2 weeks, you're going to need more than I'm like dying here. I don't know about you. My throat is gone. We're going to try and power through this.
Do you not have water to drink?
I do. It's not helping.
You're supposed to drink water all throughout to keep it lubricated.
I wish you had told me this 4 years ago.
I have such a good pee after every show.
Wow. Thanks for sharing. Okay. It's really hard to get back on track with that.
Why don't you just try starting from the beginning and do one take and talk about Ovechkin?
I'll do my very best. Okay. Up until a couple weeks ago, you only needed one hand and a thumb to count how many times Ovechkin had gone an entire game without registering a shot on goal over the course of his career. That's been a huge part of his fantasy value. You're going to need more for both hands. Now, after the last couple weeks, you can still count all the games in which he's had 0 shots on both hands, but yeah, you're going to need more fingers. He's now gone shotless 3 times in the last 7 games, which is crazy. Before this run, it had been nearly 4 years since the last time he had had a 0-shot game. And it's kind of saddening to see that his shot rates this year have returned to being have finally fallen down to a human level after they'd been superhuman for really his entire career. The rest of the league has closed the gap on him over the last few years for shot attempt rates, but he still led the league in shot attempts for all but one of those last 9 seasons. The one time he didn't, he was just a smidge behind Max Pacioretty. This year, he sits 4th in the league. Austin Matthews is one of the guys who's ahead of him in even strength. That's still great, 4th in the league in shot attempts, but it's not great relative to what we expect from Alex Ovechkin. And some might say, the whole team is shooting less, so maybe he's shooting less. That's not true. He's accounting personally for less of his line's total shots, less of his team's total shots. And it's part of a trend too. This isn't just a sudden drop this year. After holding perfectly steady for the last few, you can see now that there is a steady decline coming. And I have to thank Peter Hassett over at RussianMachineNeverBreaks.com for contributing a lot of the thoughts in this little write-up. He had an article that he just posted this morning called Alex Ovechkin Got Old, and it is a sad truth. It sucks. I don't know what to say. Age is the most likely explanation for what's happening to Ovechkin. It's not like he's having an off year or anything. This is just what happens when you have a superstar turning 31 who can still really run over most of the league in shot attempts, but not by the same margin that we saw him exceed the rest of the league by at his peak. So I guess if you have him in a keeper league, it's time to start thinking about selling. He'll still have elite shot attempt rates and shot on goal rates, which of course is more important for your own fantasy league. But he won't be giving you the same unfair advantage in all likelihood that he has in the last, over his entire career.
Sad. To quote a good tweeter. No, I won't keep that. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Okay. You don't know what I'm talking about?
What did you do?
You know, sad?
Yeah.
It's like the catchphrase of the president.
At the end of the tweets. Sad.
Yeah. Sad.
Good sad.
I'll just
Brandon sad.
Brandon sad. That would be great if he did that sometime after Columbus loses. Maybe we could put that as an episode title at some point. Just sad.
Just Brandon sad.
Oh, no, just sad.
That's good. I would.
Okay. All right. And keeping on this sad note of older players not doing well, let's end the show by talking about Anze Kopitar, who's slumping again. He had 2 assists yesterday versus Anaheim, but I'm not going to give him too much credit because Bernier was in nets. But before that, he only had 1 assist in 8 games. We were used to Kopitar having a slow start to the year, but usually for the past couple of years, once he got hot, he stayed hot, and he slayed the whole rest of the season. This year's looking like it might be different. We've gotten so many questions on Twitter and in our patron-only Facebook group asking about dropping Kopitar for guys like Galchenyuk or Tyler Johnson or Derek Stepan. And I feel like it's time to start considering moves like this. I feel like he's maybe a little... I still actually like him better than those 3, but I think it's very close. I'd be curious to know what you think. Last game, the LA lines were Carter, Pearson, and Toffoli. And then Kopitar with Dustin Brown and a guy named Adrian Kempe. So it's like Kopitar's getting the worst line mates. Like, I'm sure Jeff Carter's very happy to have Toffoli and Pearson with him and not Brown and Kempe. Marian Gaborik was scratched, by the way. And side note, he's a total snoozer. We were excited about him playing with Kopitar, but now he can't even get into the lineup. So it's kind of a mess right now for that Kopitar line and for Anze Kopitar. Obviously, he has the upside to bounce back. He is Anze Kopitar, but like if you're comparing him to these guys, if you're in a league shallow enough that you have free agents like Galchenyuk, Tyler Johnson, and Derek Stepan, is it time to consider making a move if he keeps snoozing?
Yeah, the thing with Kopitar is that there's no indication in the numbers that of what he can control that this year is any different from the past 2. Shot attempts, scoring chances, they've all been pretty darn consistent with what we're used to seeing from him in his successful years. And like I looked at shot distance too to try and see if something's up with that. He's actually taking shots from in closer this year than he has in at least the past 3 seasons. I still think he can turn it around, but I agree he's running out of room. If you compare him to that group, Elon, like they've all had their share of cold stretches too. I think Tyler Johnson has been fairly consistent for the last little while, though. That's the swap I would consider making. If you've had Kopitar all season long, I feel like you're stuck with him now. Stick it out. I think my advice to anyone who doesn't have him would be to stop trying to buy low, even though I do believe he can come back. Like you'll be paying an unfair price for the risk that you might be taking on.
Okay, since I hate to end the show on such a down note, let's talk about the other side of the coin. Tanner Pearson has 3 assists. Had 3 assists yesterday, and he's up to 11 points in his last 7 games. And he's the guy that's been on the top power play with Carter, Kopitar, Doughty, and Muzzin, not Tyler Toffoli, surprisingly. So I feel like if Tanner Pearson's still a free agent for you, it's time to buy on him. I still remember him as like one of the early Keeping Karlsson guys who we did really well, and we were saying, no, you don't. And we were saying, no, he's not going to keep it up. He has a high shooting percentage, and we looked really smart. Now I feel like his production is more sustainable. It's obviously nice that he's on a line with Jeff Carter, who's just having such an amazing season like we've talked about. I feel like maybe I would even drop like Tyler Toffoli for Tanner Pearson right now if I had the option. I wonder if that's a little too crazy.
It's too crazy.
Can I just jump in? Sure, jump in. Yeah, jump in.
It's too crazy. I would not do that. I would prefer Toffoli to Pearson. I'd prefer Kopitar to Pearson. I'd prefer, well, all the Kings we've mentioned to Pearson.
Okay, well, I mean, yeah, I still prefer Kopitar to Pearson, but Toffoli, he had 2 goals versus Anaheim yesterday, but again, Bernier factor. And before that, only 4 goals and 0 assists in 10 games since returning from injury. Or no, that's actually including that. So that's only 2 goals in 9 games before that good game yesterday. Toffoli has 24 points in 42 games overall on the year, which is a 47-point pace. Compare that to Tanner Pearson, who's riding a 51-point pace right now, 37 points, 59 games. Plus, with him being on the top power play, to me, all signs are pointing to wanting Pearson over Toffoli, but I guess you have a good reason for wanting Toffoli, so you are the guy that's usually right.
That's how I introduce myself at parties. I'm Brian, the guy who is usually right. Elon, before you close out the show, there's a few guys that I wanted to talk about that got bumped because of all the trade talk. So just very, very quickly, Travis Zajac, if you're looking for a center to add, he plays 4 games this week, and he's on a roll. 3 goals, 6 assists for 9 points in his last 9 games. So he is back doing well again. You know, he had a good run earlier this season too. And then if you're looking for shots, Philip DiGiuseppe over in Carolina, who I always make fun of you when you bring him up, Elon, so I don't know if you want to take this opportunity to give it back to me, but he has 17 shots over his last 4 games, some huge outings. He's also getting some power play time, so Carolina has a good schedule. He's also getting some power play time. Carolina has a good schedule this week, so perhaps he'll fit on your roster. And a couple other shot takers of note, Arturi Lehkonen in Montreal. He had none in his most recent game, but before that, he had a couple big outings. And actually not so much a shot taker, but just someone you might want to add later on this week, Mathieu Perreault. I mean, it's a really busy night in the NHL on Tuesday, so he plays on Tuesday if you have an open spot in your roster. I doubt it, but if you want to add him for the back-to-back that the Jets have later in the week, he could still be playing with Scheifele and Laine on that top line. I guess we'll see because the Jets haven't played in a little while. But he's a great option who is likely available in your league to add if your team needs a little boost. And then, Elon, this name is ridiculous. So I'm just going to say it because it even made to my list. Alex Burrows is doing like semi-relevant things. Not relevant things, just semi-relevant things. He's playing with Bo Horvat, which might be the reason why.
Yeah, just hopefully he doesn't catch the mumps, and then that will be okay. Or at least maybe that explains why he's playing on a good line, because all the other players are injured. But sure, good name, all fun names. I like Phil Giuseppe. I like Phil DiGiuseppe. He's currently on a line I'm seeing with Victor Rask and Derek Ryan, so he's taking the Jeff Skinner spot from earlier in the year, and I guess he's filling the Jeff Skinner role of taking a ton of shots. So good for him. And also, Brian, great segue talking about all the schedules for next week, because we've got a bonus, I guess, episode of a podcast that we're going to put at the end of this one, like I said before, all about next week's schedule. We're throwing it up there because Dave, one of our patrons, really cool guy, and he's starting something new. We thought we'd share it with all of you. It's a new podcast. He calls it Stream Scheme, but the name might change. But for now, that's the name, I guess. And I think you're going to like it. So we're going to put that right at the end of the outro music. But before we get to that, I want to thank you all for listening to the show proper. If you like the show, feel free to tweet at us. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can also give us a 5-star review on iTunes. If you want to become a patron of Keeping Karlsson, I'm going to get right to that. Now is the perfect time to do so because the trade deadline is this week, and we're doing a patron cast Wednesday night, and I'm sure that's all we're going to be talking about. So if you want to get our early takes about all the trades that happen over the next couple of days, you need to be a patron of Keeping Karlsson. We're going to be doing a whole show answering questions from the patrons. I'm sure a lot of them will be about all the trades that happen. So if you're interested in anything like that, and also, of course, joining our patron-only Facebook group, check out keepingkarlsson.com/patron for all the information there. Yes.
And Elon, before we get to the credits, I'm also going to throw out a plug for DobberProspects.com. You might be wondering who these prospects are that are changing hands around the trade deadline, like this, what's his first name? Chernak? Eric Chernak? Like this Eric Chernak character that is heading to Tampa in return for Ben Bishop. He has a C- fantasy rating over at Dobber Prospects. You'll find that maybe he's a second pairing D-man, but he's a big guy who's best known for his defensive work, not quite his offensive capabilities, so nobody to get too excited about it, in case you were thinking about it. But on the whole, Elon, why am I mentioning this now? I think I just felt like it. I was going to mention them in the credits, but I wanted to mention why.
Okay, and with that, let's cue the outro music. And Brian, why don't you go ahead and read us the credits?
All right, this episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dobber Hockey and supported by our amazing patrons. It was researched with help from Dobber Hockey, Dobber Prospects, Frozen Pool, Corsica, Hockey Analysis, Hockey Reference, Hockey Database, Hockey Viz, Elite Prospects, Roto World, and Fantrax.
Great job, Brian. Join it. Great job, Brian. I was just going to say, hope you enjoy episode 1 of Stream Scheme. Feel free to tweet at us with your feedback and let us know if you think we should do this again. And we look forward to doing another regular episode of Keeping Karlsson next week. Join us live, keepingkarlsson.com/live, 8 p.m. Sunday nights.
I want to say enjoy the show. Okay. Until then, keep on keeping Karlsson.
Cool. Long one.
Yeah. Well, those trades added like at least 20 minutes.
Yeah, this would have been a short one if it wasn't for those trades.
Well, good thing we had the trades.
Well, I would have been fine.
Love the trades.
We'll see.
Did any more happen? Well, I was like half expecting like 6 other things to happen. The deadline's Tuesday, right?
I thought it was Wednesday.
Or Wednesday. I feel like it's usually on a Tuesday.
It's
definitely this week.
I'm really stressed. Like these trades could really screw up my plans. I'm already like losing my matchup. I know you're the same. I don't know. I feel like I just have a lot of guys that are affected, like with Hansel and then like Duchesne. Anyway.
Go ahead. Tell us about it.
Well, now I'm just looking at my matchup and like I was actually doing better before we started the show. Who does he have? He's catching up he caught me in blocks. Who got so many blocks today? One sec.
Oh yeah, I got destroyed in blocks today. He had like 7 guys who got 1 each.
We were talking about me, Brian.
Come on. It's always about you.
Brett Seabrook, 5 blocks today.
I think I'm finished. I'm done. I don't think I can come back in my matchup.
You have a whole week.
I have minus 40 save points and an 852 save percentage.
Oh man.
And
that's
like
embarrassing. Being eliminated from the cupful, and we're the hosts of the cupful.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's the double no. That's the danger of disclosing our thoughts and players on every episode.
Oh, that's what we're gonna blame it on? Okay, good. Yeah, it's not because I'm bad.
My excuse already. Well, okay, we're playing with an open hand, guys.
This is gonna be a very somber episode of the podcast next week when we'll talk about who got eliminated.
Well, I'm already working on getting over it, so at least I'll be ready. I'm mentally already prepared. I have to work on that. It's gonna be hard for you, I know.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone. That was so fun. Okay. I'm gonna get to work. Have fun with the name. There were a lot of fun names earlier on. So you could scroll up, Brian, to see all the good name suggestions.
Okay. Well, what right, the Zoolander. What if I just name my
if you do the Zoolander
title is just Zoolander reference.
Okay, but the thing is, I'm probably not going to keep that in the show, and also that's like a really lame reference that everyone makes all the time. That's why I was so surprised you didn't recognize it. Like,
well, no, I get the So Hot right now, but I didn't know that's where it came from, and I didn't know why it was so applicable to Hansel.
Yeah, Dave, you're gonna get lucky, and not have to play me next week. But I mean, my one silver lining where I think I could bounce back is I have like now 4 Minnesota guys, and they only played once this week, and like Trouba and Bufflin barely played. Like I had a lot of these bye-week screws. So even being close, maybe I should just be happy that I'm in it. Like I'm sure at the beginning of the week, if I would have looked at how it would look at the end of Sunday, I would have been happy. So maybe blue skies ahead. I don't even know who this guy is, Kopitar and Feathered. I should probably look and see who. All right. Bye, everyone.